Hello, Health Champions. Today I'm going to talk about the top 10 foods that I eat in a week. But more importantly, I will also talk about why this may or may not be a good way for you to eat as well. First of all, I usually eat anywhere from 1 to 3 meals a day. And when I eat 3 meals, that's probably only about 1 day a week. But when I do, I would put those meals probably within an 8 to 12 hour feeding window. Most of the time, I will eat 2 meals per day, and I'll probably do that about 5 days in a week, and then I'll fit the meals into a 6 to 10 hour window. So I don't have a set schedule or a fixed pattern. It just whatever works around my lifestyle. And probably about 1 day a week, I'll only have 1 meal. So it just depends on how the day goes and what I have time for. My typical breakfast is to not have breakfast. That early in the morning, I'll probably only have a black coffee. Occasionally, I'll have a latte. I'll do my espresso and I'll add some raw milk to it. And some of you following a ketogenic diet might react a little bit to the milk because that milk has about 6 grams of carbs, which is all a sugar called lactose. So if you're strictly working toward a ketogenic diet, then you probably want to skip the milk. For me, I'm not really pursuing a ketogenic diet. I eat low carb in general, plus I'm very insulin sensitive. So 6 grams of carbs, the lactose is going to be absorbed very slowly. It has no fructose in it, and the protein and the fat in the milk is going to buffer the absorption. So for me, my blood sugar still stays very stable. But if that's not the case for you, then you need to check that and see if that would be a good idea for you. When you make food choices to either maintain or to restore health, it helps to understand how insulin sensitive you are. So my glucose typically is a fasting level of about 80. And my insulin level is typically around 3, my fasting insulin. So then you can take those, you can multiply them. You multiply the glucose by the insulin, and you divide by 405. Then you come up with a constant called HOMA-IR. It's a measuring tool. It stands for Homeostatic Model Assessment of Insulin Resistance. My number here is 0.6. And typically, a really good number is around 1. So 1 is very insulin sensitive. A good range is anywhere from 0.5 to 1.5. So I'm kind of in the range where it's still really good, but it's almost too insulin sensitive. So I can use a little bit more carbohydrate than most people. So let's talk a little bit about carbohydrates. We have basically 2 camps, where one camp says that they're absolutely necessary. You can't live without carbohydrates. They're your primary fuel. They're your main source of energy, etc. And then another camp that says carbohydrates are evil. You should never have any. And I think that this group is a little bit closer to the truth, that they're more evil than they're necessary, but you don't have to pick either extreme necessarily. So are they necessary? No. Carbohydrates are not necessary for humans, but that doesn't mean you have to eat 0. It doesn't mean everyone is intolerant to carbohydrate. However, even though you, with your human cells, don't really require carbohydrates because you can get a few % of glucose derived from the glycerol in fat that you eat, and proteins can also be converted into glucose. But your microbiome, which is one of the pillars of your health, they do need some carbohydrate. The good news is they don't need sugar. They don't need white bread. They primarily live off a form of carbohydrate that you can't digest. So if you eat vegetables, you eat leafy greens, you eat things with a lot of fiber, then you can keep your net carbs really low and still provide a lot of food for your microbiome. And what makes carbohydrates evil for some people is depending on if you are carbohydrate tolerant or carbohydrate intolerant. Just like someone who's severely allergic to peanuts, who is intolerant to peanut, that makes peanuts the absolute worst food on the planet for that person. And by the same token, if you're carbohydrate intolerant, then that becomes a bad food for you, but it's all dose dependent. Let's talk about the macros for someone who is carbohydrate tolerant, like myself. So I typically, in terms of carbs and protein and fat, I typically will eat about 50 grams of carbs in a day. I'll eat somewhere around 125 grams of protein and about 200 grams of fat. I don't measure these every day, but I've done enough measuring to know that based on my food choices, this is roughly where I end up. And then in terms of percentage of calories, I get somewhere around 8% of my calories from carbohydrate. I get somewhere around 20% from protein, and the rest, which would be a little over 70%, from fat. So for someone like myself who has a HOMA-IR of about 0.5 to 1.5, you can eat a little bit more carbohydrate than the typical ketogenic or really low carb diet. So depending on your activity level, I would say it's probably safe to go up to about 125 grams of carbs per day, net carbs. And that would put you at about 20% of your calories from carbohydrate. But that's, again, if you're a little bit more active, and I think it's perfectly fine for you to be there. You don't have to, but you could. And the primary danger or drawback that I see with that, and again, this doesn't apply to everybody, but for some people, is that if you sort of get the taste for it, you get more fluctuating blood glucose. And if you get the taste for carbs, then that tends to increase your cravings. So I notice if I eat a little bit more carbs, like just happened over the holidays here, then I'll have a tendency to crave more carbs and to have to eat more frequently. But because of my stability, all I have to do is go 1 to 2 days and cut them out, and cravings are gone again. But if you're carbohydrate intolerant, if you are insulin resistant, then those numbers are probably a little bit too high, a little too much carbohydrate for you. So let's say that you measure and your HOMA-IR is over 4, which is moderately insulin resistant. It's still not crazy or one of the worst, but then I would think you probably want to keep your carbohydrates consistently under about 50 grams per day. And this is also going to vary depending on your size and age and activity level, of course, but just a rough ballpark. And then because it's good to change things up a little bit once in a while, I would say occasionally, like 1 day a week or so, you might go up a little bit higher just to shake things up a bit. And then you could go up to maybe 75 grams a day. But what's ultimately going to decide is, are you getting the results you're looking for? But now let's say that you're even more insulin resistant, that your HOMA-IR is over 8, which is not that unusual because that's pretty typical type 2 diabetes. Then you probably want to restrict carbohydrates even more and eat even fewer meals, maybe 1 or 2 and hardly ever 3. Then you keep your carbs under 10 to 30 grams per day. And this is, for most people, going to put you in ketosis, which allows you to reverse insulin faster, but also the ketones are powerful anti-inflammatory signaling molecules. And type 2 diabetes very frequently is associated with a low-grade chronic inflammation that the ketones are going to help you reverse. But just like the other cases, it's probably good to shake things up a bit once in a while. The body likes to adapt. So if we get up to 50 carbs per day occasionally, then that keeps the body on its toes, so to speak. But still, you don't want those carbohydrates to be a bad quality. Don't use any processed foods, avoid grains, etc. But an occasional sweet potato or some vegetables that are a little bit more starchy would be a good idea. So I'm not trying to say at all that these would be exact numbers or that they would apply to everybody or that this is the way it is. These are rough estimates and guidelines based on my experience and my opinion. But in the end, the final say is whatever works, whatever gets the results. So if your goal is weight loss, then you need to find a combination that works for you, that creates that weight loss and keeps it coming. If you are a diabetic or if you're pre-diabetic and you're trying to improve your numbers on blood work, then you have to track those numbers and understand what they mean, and then find the numbers and the frequency and the combination that gets you where you want to go. And then when I actually go to have a real meal, then that's going to depend on what my day looks like. If I'm going to work, if I'm going away to leave the house, then I might actually eat breakfast at 8 in the morning because it might be 6 o'clock at night before I have another one. But if I stick around the house, I probably won't have anything to eat until 12 or 1 p.m. And a couple of examples I like to eat are things like yogurt. I eat full-fat, plain yogurt. I like one from Trader Joe's because it's the most sour that I can find. If it's sour, that means the bacteria have consumed some of the sugar in the yogurt, but it also means that there's more bacteria, and that's one of the benefits of the yogurt. I also like to mix in some sour cream because I like it a little bit richer. I probably use about 1/3 sour cream and 2/3 yogurt. Sometimes, but not always, I sweeten with a bit of stevia, and occasionally I'll put some berries in there as well. And on top of the yogurt, I put a mix of ground flax and chia. I call it chillax. And if you grind it ahead of time and mix it, but keep it in a cold freezer, it will keep for many months. I've had it up to a year, and as long as you keep it really cold and away from oxygen, then it's going to keep just fine. I also like to add a little bit of pecans or pumpkin seeds. They give a nice crunch and a little bit more satiety to that meal. An alternative to the yogurt, if I have a little more time to cook, would be some eggs and sausage or bacon. Sometimes I just soft boil the eggs and eat a half a dozen. If I have sausage or bacon, I'll probably have 3 or 4 pan-fried easy over eggs. And I like to have some sort of vegetable with it. So maybe some cabbage, maybe some bell pepper, or an avocado. Something that's super yummy that I'll have once in a blue moon, a couple of times a year, I'll buy a few of them a few times a year, are plantains. And you cut them up, you fry them in a pan with some butter, salt, and pepper, and have them with your eggs and bacon, and it's heavenly. But even though I don't really have a problem processing carbohydrates, they quickly grow on me and they carry over and give me cravings for other things. And all of a sudden, I want more sweets and more food and so forth. So very, very rarely would I put something like that in. And if you are insulin resistant, if you're carbohydrate intolerant, then I would cut that out altogether. An example for dinner would be anytime between 4 and 9 p.m. I try to keep it earlier, but depending on the day and whenever I can get home and get around to it and finish cooking, it might be closer to 9. But earlier, I believe, is better. And very often, I'll have a salad with grilled chicken or grilled steak. For the leafy greens, my go-tos are spring mix, lettuce, romaine, and arugula. And just because it keeps a little longer, my staple is usually romaine. It keeps a week or even 2, whereas the spring mix arugula tend to go bad pretty quick. I'll also mix in some sliced tomatoes and avocado. I'll put in some onion and bell pepper, sometimes some pumpkin seeds, and always plenty of extra virgin olive oil and vinegar. I season it with salt and pepper, and I forgot to put that on the list, but I also like to put on some goat cheese. It does really well on a salad like this. Another dinner in the evening could be something like fish with vegetables, and my favorite fish are salmon, cod, flounder, tuna, grouper, and mahi-mahi. And the reason is that they're tasty, but they're basically what I can find frozen locally, and it's widely available. The vegetables would be things like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and I'd like to keep the broccoli and cauliflower fresh when I can. I do keep some frozen for backup, but the broccoli keeps pretty well, so usually I do that fresh. It can keep over a week often. And I'll serve that with generous amount of melted butter or hollandaise sauce, which is based on egg yolks and butter. It's super yummy. If you haven't had it, look it up. It takes a little while to figure out exactly how to make it, but once you got it, it's super easy and so worth it. And often I serve that with some capers for that contrast flavor and some hard-boiled eggs. If you take the hard-boiled eggs and you put them in a slicer and you turn them 3 times, you get tiny little cubes that are so super yummy with this combination and the melted butter. Quite often I'll have a pizza, but I do make it myself, and I start off with a gluten-free tortilla. They're usually low carb, but I try to find things that have natural ingredients, not a lot of fake protein powder and soy things to keep it low carb, but make it kind of weird. And then I put some tomato paste on there. I slice generous amount of tomatoes and mushrooms. I put lots of vegetables like onion and bell pepper on there. Then I also have plenty of meat like ham and bacon bits and pepperoni. I top it off with some jalapenos and plenty of shredded cheddar cheese. And I usually serve that with a salad called a pizza salad. And you can look it up online. It's a recipe for Swedish pizza salad. It's essentially a version of coleslaw, but it's much healthier than that because all it is cabbage, thinly sliced, and vinegar. You add some spices like basil, oregano, salt, and pepper. And then you drizzle extra virgin olive oil, and some recipes, though, call for a little bit of sugar, which you don't want to put in there. You want to put maybe a little bit of stevia or erythritol or something, but this is not something that's supposed to be sweet. So if you do, it's just a tiny, tiny sprinkle. And it's super yummy and goes perfect with a pizza. Dinner could also be fajitas, and they will have everything except the wrapper, the tortilla. So I start off with skirt steak. I put it on a grill that is super hot. I put them on like 1.5 minutes per side. And then I serve them with onion bell pepper, the pan-fried version. I make plenty of guacamole, and this would be typically using just avocados, an onion, cilantro, garlic, and lime, plus some salt and pepper. And very rarely I'll also add some refried beans, but they really don't need that. And the wrapper, that's more of a hand-eating finger food thing, because there's nothing in here that you're going to miss any flavor at all. Super delicious. When I make chicken wings, I'll typically do them in the oven or in an air fryer. So with an air fryer, you're more limited on space, but it's faster and they get a little crispier. In the oven, they get more tender and more thoroughly cooked. Plus, I think the spices kind of cook in a little bit better, but of course it takes longer. For spices, I start off with a barbecue spice called butt rub. It's very versatile, and you know, like they say, a little butt rub makes everything better. But then I make sure to add lots of hot sauce like wing sauce, sriracha, lemon, curry, any spice you like. You really can't go wrong just dousing these wings with spices. I'll serve with some celery and bell pepper, and with plenty of guacamole. So the guacamole is kind of like a dip, both for the wings and for the vegetables. When it's a little more festive, I like to do a steak dinner, and my favorite cuts for a good steak would be a filet or a ribeye. And if it's a little more festive, here's where I might increase the carbs a little bit more. As you can see, most of the samples are very low carbs, but here we add in some potatoes, and I'll do those in the oven with lots of garlic and butter, salt and pepper. And I'm kind of a sauce guy, so I like rich sauces with lots and lots of flavor. That's kind of what makes the meal, I think. One of my favorites for steak is béarnaise sauce. You can look up those recipes. And another one is Bordelais sauce, which is a red wine reduction sauce. Also, if you have access to crème fraîche, then that sort of makes its own sauce. You just kind of clean out the frying pan if you use something like stainless steel. It doesn't work with non-stick. You need to have something that sticks. You rinse it out with some cognac or some water, and then you just put in some green peppercorns and this crème fraîche, and it makes an incredible sauce. And a really nice side dish to add some green to this that's a little bit tart is tabbouleh, which is a parsley salad. And the original recipe for tabbouleh has bulgur wheat in it, but I put pecan nuts, chopped pecans instead. So you basically use parsley, chopped onion, chopped lime, and chopped nuts. You drizzle some olive oil, salt, and pepper, and it's super yummy. It's a great side dish. I probably eat 2-3 times a week. And I use quite a few spices and condiments, things like salt and pepper, the butt rub that I talked about, curry, paprika powder, soy sauce, basil, oregano, green peppercorns. So they kind of look like black pepper, but they're unripe and they're wonderfully aromatic. You can find them in a lot of farmers markets and places that have a lot of spices. I recommend you try them. They're incredible. I use a lot of things like hot sauce and sriracha. I like those on eggs, for example, and in sauces. I like the capers, like I mentioned, with fish. I like olives, pickles, jalapenos, and for hamburgers, without a bun, of course, would be mustard and ketchup. So some of you now might say that, well, some of these things are going to have sugar in them. So if you look at the ingredient label, then there'll be some sugar. But there are two things you need to realize. First of all, you look for the version that has less sugar. And you can often find these without any sugar. But even if they do have sugar on the label, if you eat something like sriracha, you're going to eat maybe 1 or 2, or maybe if you're like a spice freak, you might eat 3 teaspoons. And the amount of sugar in that is negligible. Even for a diabetic, that is so little sugar, and it's not the primary flavor that it's not really going to trigger anything. So realize that it's dose dependent. And here's a list of some other miscellaneous stuff. So like the gluten-free tortilla, I use stevia for a lot of things. I use erythritol for some things. So stevia is the better sweetener. Erythritol is totally okay as long as you don't overdo it. If I want to have a treat, one of my favorites would be a keto ice cream. There's some good brands out there. They use either erythritol or allulose. And I don't see any huge harm in it unless you're super sensitive to dairy. This is not the best form of dairy because it is pasteurized, so I try to keep it to a minimum. And also, you don't want to overdo it, especially if it tends to give you those sweet cravings. If you can control it, use it once in a while, but if it gives you cravings, then maybe better avoid it. And I do also indulge in some nice red wine on occasion and some whiskey and very rarely a beer. And the beer is because it has gluten, it's made from grain, and it does have some extra carbohydrates. So again, if you're insulin resistant, you probably want to cut out the beer entirely. If you're going to have some alcohol once in a while, then stick with the whiskey or distilled liquor because it has the fewest carbohydrates. It's the least damage, so to speak. And also, I think you want to limit the drinks to maybe 7 or 8 or 10 per week. And if you're a woman, you want to do slightly less than that. So if you really enjoy these, then I think it's okay in moderation. If you don't, then absolutely no reason to start because it's not like it's beneficial for anything. So that's quite a long list. Now let's try to narrow down the top 10. So I'm not going to read all these because we've gone through them. You can make notes on your own. But top 10 would definitely, for me, include steak. It would include chicken and ground beef. Also on my top list that I would eat almost every week for sure would be included eggs, butter, and extra virgin olive oil. And also very frequent are yogurt and sour cream. So I guess that's adding up pretty quickly, huh? We're already up to 8. And then we're on to vegetables, fruits, and berries. And this list is even longer, so we're going to split it in 2. And some of the things that have to be on there are romaine and avocado, and also broccoli, cauliflower, and bell pepper. So that already puts us at 13. I guess my top 10 list is overflowing a little bit, but that's okay. And here's part 2 of the vegetables, fruits, and berries. So there we would include things like tomato, onion, and parsley I eat all the time. And some of these I don't, like garlic, I eat relatively small amounts. Even if I eat 10 cloves in a week, that's still not really enough to be a substantial food source. But parsley, I do eat so much that I will put it as one of the ingredients. I do eat potato, not every week, but on a regular basis. And also I put lime in virtually everything. I don't eat a ton of berries, but when I have yogurt, for example, I'll have a package where they mix these 3 berries. So I kind of count them as one item. And I do have that, not a lot, but I do have it a couple of 3 times a week probably. So there are 19 of the top 10 foods, which leaves nuts and seeds. And here we have pecans, walnuts, and macadamia. On the nuts, and my favorite seeds are flaxseed, chia seed, and pumpkin seed. And out of the nuts, pecans are the ones that I do eat the most. They are so easy to work with. They're so tasty. You can put them on anything. I love the other ones as well, but I don't use them as often. And all of these seeds, the flaxseed, chia seed, and pumpkin seed, because I put them in the yogurt several times a week, then that would definitely have to be on that list. So those are my favorite 23 foods on my top 10 lists. And if you're one of those people who just feel outraged that a top 10 food list has anything else than 10 on there, then there's a comment section down below where you can just vent and let it all out. And if you want to learn more about how to evaluate yourself, how to monitor, how to decide where you are in terms of insulin resistance and carbohydrate intolerance, I've created a blood work course, because how can you take action? How can you know what to do if you don't know where you are? And the problem is that even if you have blood work taken every year or even twice a year, most doctors who order the blood works, they don't know how to read it. They don't know what it says when they get the information back. And they very often don't really measure the things that matter. If they only measure glucose and A1C, they're only finding the problem after it's a problem. They can't prevent it because the signs showed up 10, 15, 20 years earlier if you know what to look for. And just a couple of markers that I've never seen ordered on any outside blood work, even 1% of the time, are things like insulin and a complete cholesterol profile, an NMR, that measures the particle count and the particle sizes to truly evaluate if the cholesterol is bad or not. It goes so far beyond just high cholesterol and LDL and HDL, because you can only truly take control if you understand what's going on. And if you get a baseline, you change some things, and you know how to evaluate where you end up, then you know if you truly made progress. I'll put a link down below if you want to learn more. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love that one. And if you truly want to master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and turn on all the notifications so you never miss a life-saving video.